Private enterprise has played a role in warfare going back several millennia. As far back as 400 BC, countries, kingdoms, and empires were hiring private militaries to supplement their war efforts, if not fight them in their entirety. Over time, the relationship between company and government body evolved. During World War II, American companies such as Rockola and General Motors helped manufacture firearms and vehicles to be used by American military personnel in Europe and Asia. This method of relying on private enterprise to supplement production had been commonplace going back to the American Civil War. But following the end of the Cold War, the dynamic changed. New companies were formed with the sole intention of assuming the heavy lifting for the U.S. Department of Defense. During the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, these companies, known as defense contractors or private military companies, would make billions providing services that the military was more than capable of doing and probably should have been. This week, we discuss our time as contractors and the merits or lack thereof in for-profit warfare. We're also going to look at recent events in Afghanistan and venture into the Afghanistan discussion board on the popular website Reddit. Welcome to the Boardwalk.
All right, welcome to the Boardwalk. Today we're going to talk about something we all know and are intimately familiar with: contracting in Afghanistan, the war that supplements the actual war.
It's the hypocrisy episode.
Yeah, it's another hypocrisy episode.
Yeah.
We've done several of these, I think.
Yeah.
Zach, Stu, we all met as contractors. We were not in uniform. Our uniform was a Columbia shirt and khaki pants. But let's start out and talk about what we were kind of a little bit about our contracts. So I was contracted as an intelligence analyst in some very broad category. I got put into Paul Mills side when I got there. But you're a civilian and you supplement the Department of Defense. So you guys did the same thing, right?
Yeah.
Different company.
I think we're all in the same contract through different companies.
That's another thing, right? How intricate that is.
Yeah. So it's
all the different companies and subcontractors operating on the same contract.
Yeah, I was a subcontractor, meaning my company had a contract through your guys' company. And what that meant was I got paid like 10 grand less. That was about the only difference.
I was also a subcontractor, so I learned that one the hard way too. So Matt, who we've had on, like we all work for the same company, and he was considered prime because he worked directly for that company. So the way contracting worked in the intelligence field, right? So the concept is an intelligence analyst, be they an all-source analyst like we were, or a signals intelligence analyst or an imagery analyst, is as a contractor is supposed to be able to do the workload of 2 or 3 soldiers, right? And so that would do 2 things. One, it would reduce the troop numbers in a war zone. So in the case of Afghanistan, we'd seen over the last couple of years that they estimate we had anywhere from 10 to 15,000 troops in Afghanistan at any given point in time. Well, according to this news article I just read, there's still like 16,000 contractors in Afghanistan, which is more contractors than their war troops in the last 4 years or so, roughly. Right. So it looks good on paper that, we've only got 10,000 military personnel out there. But in reality, most of the heavy lifting is being pushed over to contractors to provide that analytical support. And we've talked about it where we worked at, we had some green suiters in the SIGINT shop and in the imagery shop. And I think everybody else was a contractor, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it kind of felt like that because I started out doing SIGINT when I first got there. It was a lot more green suiter, as we say, a lot more Army driven over there. Then I did the Paul Mills stuff, and it was just working with you guys. I mean, it had like a captain or a warrant officer, I guess, you reported to, and that was, I mean, the Army. I don't feel like until we actually sat down with the colonel really had a much of a say in what we did. A lot of times, I don't know. It all felt very disjointed anyway.
Well,
that's another thing.
It kind of was,
But I was in a different company than you guys. Actually, I was probably on whatever contract we were on, and I think
Okay.
we were on two different contracts.
You're right. There were because they end up they were fighting for the follow up contract,
Yeah, or
which
something.
your company won. So here's how we're going to get into a little more detail on how these contracting companies are pretty much just another example of cronyism in the U.S. government. So the company that Kyle worked for and the company that Stu and I worked for are probably the two largest um, contracting companies that provided intel support during the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. And towards the end of my time there, Stu and our time there, Kyle's company won the contract to renew the Intel program. And so instead of having two programs, there'd be one program with one prime uh, contract provider or contractor, if you will, or vendor. And our company appealed it. And like everything else, there's pretty much an unlimited number of appeals you can make. You have an informal appeal, a formal written appeal, and then like a final appeal. And so, what our company was trying to do, in order to justify being the main uh, contract provider, or yeah, contract service provider, was they went on a big hiring spree. Do you remember that, Stu?
Yeah, it was insane, and we were watching it live as it was happening. Like, it was hard to believe, but yeah, they started trying to scoop up essentially anybody who met like the minimum requirements to be an analyst and make it so that the other company essentially couldn't hire enough people to cover the requirements of the contract. Like that's a pretty high level of petty, but I mean they'll do it at those levels of high risk high reward contracting, because there's some huge contracts out there. Like it's millions and millions of dollars that you're talking about. So
Yeah,
it was very impressive the lengths they went to secure that.
because by the time the money got funneled down to us, I'm sure we were making a fraction of what they made off of our bodies simply being there.
Yeah, and actually, so you bring up a good point. I was just looking into
Yeah.
contract numbers in Afghanistan, right? And so DynCorp are one of our favorite companies to talk about. DynCorp, they most famously came into Kandahar and ruined the already bad food. Um,
I hate them so much for that.
right?
Not just their dancing boys
Oh yeah,
problem and controversy,
yeah.
but yeah,
So
that's also DynCorp.
yeah, let's
Yeah.
address that real quick. So that was 2009, I believe, right? 2009, 2010. DynCorp, which DynCorp is for the most part, a private military company. Um, kind of like Blackwater, but less human rights abuse. Um, they,
But bigger. I mean,
but
aren't they
bigger. Oh yeah,
huge?
they're
Yeah, they're
bigger.
massive.
Maybe they're closer to Raytheon. That might be a better comparison, right? Like they provide security and stuff like that. That's like their bread and butter. But then DynCorp expanded. They got into things like the food service contracts and things like that. Well, DynCorp had they had four subcontractors up in Kunduz, and I'm pretty sure they're all Afghans. And they got in trouble. They pulled some 15-year-old bachabazi and had him come in and perform for them, and word got out about it. And four managers in the area for DynCorp were fired, and that was it. I don't know if anything even happened to the subcontractors. I just remember hearing that four senior managers for the program in country were fired for what
And
happened.
that's just the ones that got caught. I mean,
Exactly.
weren't there like documents from Karzai at the time talking about like all this stuff happening? It was all basically covered up for a long time, not just like with DynCorp, but just other
Yeah, because
companies
there
in
was a
general.
request for there was a request like to the interim interior minister of Afghanistan to pretty much quash. I think they squashed the report so that it wouldn't come out. And they actually tried to do it. Like so, corruption runs deep in Afghanistan to the point that it touched, trying to cover up a clear sex crime that in any modern country would not be tolerated, right? But that's just one part of DynCorp. DynCorp, most famously, like we said, when they showed up, they took away the donor kebabs from Tuesday.
They took away anything with spice in it and just replaced it with the most bland. They didn't let any of those third party nationals that work there, like any of the Pakistanis or
the
Indians,
Nepalese
cook their own
guys.
food.
Yeah, that
Yeah,
food was so good.
It was good. Yeah, I mean, you could always go there and actually get fairly decent food. And then, yeah, DynCorp came in and ruined it with their bland.
And we could only get eggs fried hard.
Oh, that's right. They wouldn't let you get them running anymore.
Yeah.
I'm sure that would.
Yeah. So the reason that DynCorp's in the news now, they just received a contract to provide maintenance support to Afghanistan's helicopters, and the contract is for up to $554 million. And what DynCorp put out is that they will, with that contract, they are going to hire an additional 250 people to support the contract between Afghanistan and Huntsville, Alabama, where the program will be based out of. I did the math. There's no way they're paying every new employee $2 million, right? So that's kind of where DynCorp and all these companies make their money. And I can use our program, I think, as a pretty good example. I don't know what the specifics were regarding how much our companies were getting paid, but for them, the cost to employ us is really cheap. It's pretty much airfare. Not even.
Yeah,
I
right.
had to pay my own ticket to Virginia to do my training, and then from there they got us to Afghanistan.
Yeah, that seems about right. But yeah, I mean, they basically get paid a ton of money, and then depending on how desperate the market is, I mean, at the time, so I was in the Army a little bit later than you, but like when I joined the Army, I mean, it was literally full of a bunch of people that graduated like in the recession and had nothing else to do. So I still think that the Army was never more educated than it was in like 2011 to like 2014. Everyone else got out. Like, I mean, we all got out after, we did our time, but I mean, it was literally like full of like college educated people with master's degrees, had nothing else to do. And so when they got out of the Army, they wanted to make more money. A lot of those contracting jobs opened up, and because the war, I guess, was winding down at that point, they could pay you less. So like all that crazy contractor money people were making at the height of the war was faded out. And I mean, and so at least me, I was employed on like is my time really worth this money kind of bandwagon? But I mean, I don't know what else I was going to do at the time.
Right.
I mean, so you kind of take it.
I think about that. So unlike Kyle and Stu, I re-enlisted. I did more than 4 years voluntarily. And I got out and I moved to Boise, Idaho with my wife and my son. And I started going to school there at Boise State. And I was like, you know what? The bills are getting paid, but the bills are barely getting paid. So I decided to do something I said I would never do, and that's become a contractor. And so, I meet Kyle and Stu out there, and we got paid very well. And I remember thinking, had I not re-enlisted and came out as a contractor in 2011, 2012, when I got out of the Army, I probably could have tripled my income. Right? Because that's back when the contracts were huge. So the biggest contracts are logistics. If you are over there and part of your job is getting things from point A to point B, you were still making very good money when we were there. I mean, we were making good money, don't get me wrong, but we weren't making the money that the supply guys were making. It was crazy.
Well, we weren't making, and a lot of the whole promise of that contracting, at least earlier on in the war, was that you could go over there, you suck it up for like a year, and then you basically have a house paid off.
Yep.
Like, you could do it. I mean, if you didn't have a family or anything, it was like, all right, suffer through it for a year, get all this money. I'll just go buy a house in cash when I come home. Well, or 2 years or whatever. But I mean, what ends up happening is that lifestyle is, maybe we can talk about this later. I don't know. That lifestyle is addicting to some people. It's like crack cocaine, because what you do is you had no real responsibility except the job you were doing. You were fed. You didn't have to go to the grocery store. You didn't have to run errands. It was just like, go to work, go back, sleep, go to work every day. And what you would do is you get like a couple weeks off every 6 months, and you just go hit up Dubai, get all your debauchery out of the way, or go over to Thailand or something, and hop back on a plane and come back and do it again. And you could make a lot of money, but you know, I just watched a lot of people's lives and stuff get destroyed, or you hear all those stories like, yeah, I've got to pay child support forever and
Mm-hmm.
all this other stuff. Because,
Well,
yeah, it
so
just destroys their life.
the program manager for us, um, he was, or I guess the area manager, right? He wasn't the program manager. He was, I guess you could say, he was the Michael Scott, the regional manager for CAF. He uh, he was a retired lieutenant colonel from the army, right? He did 20 something years. He retired as a lieutenant colonel. Although I'm always skeptical of that because he can't remember where he got his end of his like retirement ceremony. He was
Hmm.
so close to retirement, and he was in our. This is his story. He was in Baghdad, and he was pretty much gonna, he was coming back to retire, and he said he did his retirement ceremony at the palace, and he couldn't remember the name of the palace. And I said, well, which palace is it? Because Saddam Hussein has, I think, 3 palaces in the immediate area west of the river. And he's like, I can't remember which one is the big one, like Al Faw Palace, the one that everybody that's ever been to Baghdad knows what it's called. So I've always been skeptical of him, right? But he is a retired lieutenant colonel. He is a retired lieutenant colonel, married and all that stuff, and he pretty much went straight into contracting. He's got, as a lieutenant colonel, he's got a pretty decent pension, right? Chances are he's got some money saved up because you make good money as an officer, and your expenses are typically low when you're in the military. You think about it, a private makes like $1,200 a month, but there's not a lot of money that they have to actually spend. There's just money they choose to spend. So I think his name was Craig. I don't know, I'll throw his name out there. I won't throw his last name out. He uh he started out as a contractor. He became like the regional program manager, and then he was out there in Afghanistan for like 4 or 5 years. And from what I've been told, his wife pretty much gave him an ultimatum that you need to come home and spend some retirement time with your wife and your kids and your grandkids. And so he came home for like a year, but then the itch got to him and he came back out, and then his wife left him, so now he's got to stay out there to provide alimony. Like that happens to a surprising number of people. When I was first going to Afghanistan, we stopped in Bagram. um, I was in Bagram for a day or two until they figured out where we were going, and I ran into a guy over at the smoke pit, and he told me he was 33 years old. He'd been out there for 12 years, coming home for a couple weeks every now and then, like a lot of people do. But he'd been there for 12 years, and he was in the logistics contract. So he was making, probably upwards of 350 a year, especially at the beginning of the contracts. And he's like, "Oh, I'm going home." Like, what are you going to do when you get home? He's retired at 33. He's got a house in Dallas. He's got a truck, a car, an RV, a couple $1 million in the bank. Like people use it as a retirement program, and I don't think that's what contracting's supposed to be. You're supposed to be, aiding the military, right? Which we're going to get into some regarding what should the role of these companies be. But yeah, for the most part, people treated defense contracting as a way to get out of debt, which that's what I did. I used it to pay off a lot of debt and stuff like that. I'll be the first to admit that I'm a capitalist, and I exploited a situation to put my family in a better position. But it probably shouldn't exist for that.
Yeah, I mean, I did the same thing. I remember talking to, I think, our contract manager, and he was driving me to the other side of the base to get something, like a card or something. I can't remember. And he's just like, he's like, I've been here for like 10 years. He's like, and one day, if you keep coming out here and doing this, you can be in my spot and just managing these people out here. I go, that sounds horrible,
Right?
man. That sounds like, I mean, I like doing intelligence work, but I can't imagine just being out here being a middle manager to a bunch of endless, security contractors. And like that was one of the things that really just turned me off on the whole thing. When he told me that, I was like, is that what I'm working for? To just be driving around in a Tata truck around Kandahar airfield, just getting people cat cards? Like, I think I'd shoot myself. I think I'm going to
Yeah.
grab one of those M4s off the wall because this is awful. I mean, it's a terrible life. So that was one of the things that made me say, yeah, I don't think I want to do this anymore. But
Yeah.
like you, I put my family in a better position. I was able to come back and use the GI Bill and stuff and get a real degree, and better myself. And it was hard though, because the whole time I'm like, I can go back right now and make money. Like I can go back right now
Oh
and
yeah.
just not be working at this hospital while I go to school. Like and it's tough. Yeah. But I mean, I kind of broke the conditioning, but like you said, it takes a while.
Oh, I was dead set. I had a return date. I was going to come back this day, and then the way it happened for me is I was talking to my wife and my son. We were Skyping with our shitty internet connection that costs like $100 a month, and my wife called me immediately after I hung up, and my son was at the time he was about to turn 3, and he was just he had had enough. And I think I went into the office that day and said I'm leaving in 2 weeks. So it was a no brainer for me, but I was ready to stay just a little bit longer, right? Collect just a couple more paychecks, and a couple more paychecks would set me up for another 3 months coming back home and going to school, right? Like 3 more months, I wouldn't have to worry about anything. But yeah, I think people get sucked into that lifestyle, and they're there for a decade plus doing
Yeah,
it.
because like you said, it's one more check. It's one more check, and then all of a sudden it's like, just one more year, one more year. Or and so many people I've talked to, man, like they were just like, I'm gonna go back and buy up some rental properties and stuff. I'm like, okay, good luck, and they're still there, man.
There are a
They're
lot of
still saving for those
slumlords.
rental properties, too.
All the slumlords apparently get their start in Afghanistan
Yeah,
as contractors.
yeah. Like I'm gonna be a slumlord and open some Section 8. I'm like, dude.
Yeah. But
I
then
mean,
Stu got onto it. You got onto a better contract when we left. Your contract did provide for a little more time back home. You had like was it 3 months on and off or something like that? 4 months on and
Yeah,
off.
yeah. So my first contract after the one we were all on, I did another year, and I was like, oh, I'm kind of getting burnt out on this. So yeah, they had an option for 3 months on, 3 months off, and I did three of those. But I don't know. It was kind of getting to me. Like it's definitely more like sustainable, but at the same time, like when I was home, I just wasn't doing anything. I would just basically get home, just lie in bed and stare at the fucking ceiling for 3 months, and then take care of whatever you had to, and then just get back out there again. So it was kind of destructive for me. But yeah, I mean, I kept contracting after you guys up until March of 2020, and finally decided it'd be good to live in the U.S. for a little while.
Just
So
in time for a
yeah,
pandemic.
it's yeah, that was unfortunate timing, but it has been good to get back to the States.
Yeah. Like it's crazy. So when I was looking into these contracting companies, so we use private military contractor, defense contractor companies. They're all the same thing. They're private enterprises that provide services to the U.S. government to support military operations in one way or another. Just because I keep using different terms because I'm inconsistent like that. The biggest contractors in Afghanistan we were talking about, we actually think were valid contracts. You had the company called Floor, Fluor, and they did a lot of the building maintenance and sanitation and things like that. And then, whichever company was responsible for providing food in your neck of Afghanistan. I think Floor also did that. Like we said, DynCorp got into that, and so they were the food
I
provider.
think Floor was doing that before DynCorp got there, or somebody was.
I know. I can't remember who it was. It may have been Floor. That I think that's the most likely one because they're the biggest contract out there, right?
Yeah, and that makes sense. I mean, if you're building infrastructure and roads and stuff, I mean, we don't have the Roman army, right? We're not we're not building roads and stuff as we conquer things. It's like
Right.
you have to hire people that know what they're doing. But I mean, I think that is a valid contract, like you
Yeah.
said.
Yeah. Providing those type of services, I don't think anybody has an issue with that. And we also kind of wanted to clarify that I don't have a problem with any of these companies existing. Like I think that Raytheon and Lockheed and Northrop Grumman, yeah, they have they have valid uses in the market as weapons developers because that is in theory a resource that doesn't need to be that the government doesn't need to be reliant upon building. Instead, you could have somebody that's building these products, and then they can pitch it to you as the Secretary of Defense, and you figure out how it will be best applicable to whatever the mission is of your military. The issue is the relationship that those companies now have really with like our Congress. And we kind of got into it about these generals who retire. And then, James Mattis, when he left, he went on the board of directors at General Dynamics. Lloyd Austin, the current Secretary of Defense, when he retired, he was on the board for Raytheon. Like that would be a conflict of interest if you're still on the board. It's probably still somewhat of a conflict of interest when he's on the board and he's probably being used. He's probably, trying to help influence Raytheon get a contract. And when you look at a company like Fluor, which I think they're based out of India, actually, or at least I know a lot of the contractors that were out there were based out of India. I'm pretty sure you've got some military bigwigs who are on that board of directors, and it's a lot of backdoor deals. You see a lot of no bid contracts, which a no bid contract is where you don't have to fight anybody to receive the contract. So if you're Kyle's company and then you're the company that Stu and I worked for, and you're both bidding on a contract, they had to bid, right? That's why in the intel field the contracts were getting smaller and smaller because they had to bid. Then you had other contracts where people don't have to bid, and the most famous one's actually in Iraq, and that was KBR, which is a subsidiary of Halliburton, which the former CEO of Halliburton was Dick Cheney, which is the full circle why Zach hates Dick Cheney. One of the reasons why I hate Dick Cheney.
We've come back.
Yeah.
We've come back to our hatred of Dick Cheney.
Right. So no bid contracts are certainly more common in Iraq, but they do exist in Afghanistan. And when you look at it from the perspective of a taxpayer or just a rational human being, you go, well, that shouldn't be how this works. You're dealing with, other people's money as the federal government. And that's where, contracting as a career became a thing, was in Afghanistan and Iraq, because contracting has existed, going back years.
It's basically just a continuation of mercenary stuff. I mean, literal entire European armies would hire the Swiss to come fight their wars for them. So it's like, I mean, it's the same thing. I mean, you can say there's some sort of loyalty to it, but it's like, I mean, I'm just there for the money, being honest with you.
Well, yeah, I mean, there is the French Foreign Legion. They haven't gone to Afghanistan yet, I guess. So, still holding out for when they show up.
But I mean, I think it is a continuation of that. It's what, Stu?
No, I was saying China doesn't need their help.
Yeah, when they become the new bigwig in Afghanistan shortly.
Yeah, but that is interesting though that you bring up that point that there's so many contractors there, but I don't think those contractors that are there, they're doing intelligence like we were doing necessarily. No. Like you said, infrastructure, food, services, logistics, moving things back and forth, especially now that it's all closing down, I guess. But I mean, they can't be there that much longer, man. There's just nobody to defend them.
Right. Well, so you say that. I'm sitting here. We talked about this before we hit the record button, but contracting companies are increasing the hiring process right now. So this is dated April 23rd. It's from BloombergLaw.com. Full disclosure, I have no idea who they are. This could be just a bunk website like, the Huffington Post or Fox News, but I don't know. But it says the Defense Department has 16,832 workers employed by contractors in Afghanistan, of whom 6,147 are U.S. citizens. That sounds about right. Like Kyle said, most of the contractors are not American. They're providing services. They're not doing intel support and stuff like that. There's like 2,500 troops remaining as of April 23rd, right? So 6.5 to 1 is your spread. Since 2002, the Pentagon has spent $108 billion on contracted services in Afghanistan. That is roughly 11% of the money that has been spent on the war in Afghanistan, according to the Department of Defense estimations of like $950 billion. That's a pretty big portion of the money. 11% is a lot of money, right? And some of these contracts I don't think should have existed. When you have a company like Aegis provided in 2011, they got a contract for $497 million to provide embassy security. That's what Marines do.
Right.
right?
Yeah. And intelligence the same way. I mean, the army has an entire intelligence corps.
Yeah,
Like, why are we over there doing the same thing that a soldier could do? I don't.
Yeah, I know
I don't
we
know.
like to. I know we provided like good quality, but like if you had a couple of like good soldiers, you know, like we were, you were probably not doing double their work. Like I know you brought up early on in the podcast that you're supposed to be basically, you know, having a contractor cover like, you know, 2 or 3 soldiers work. I don't think we necessarily did that. We, you know, we were subject matter experts like we were supposed to be. But
I agree. I agree. And yeah, if you had, well, so that's a great point you bring up, Stu. So the 82nd, when they rolled in, so this is after you, Kyle. Kyle, you're gonna love this one. The 82nd replaces the 101st, and they bring actual intel soldiers. Like we have a shop full of green suiters. We've got 3 or 4 soldiers to a provincial team. It's awesome. And then within a week, they were all gone.
mm-hmm.
They were pulled to do bullshit like area beautification because it's not the 82nd if there's a fucking weed in the ground in Kandahar. That is unacceptable. They pulled all those guys to move beds out of old ass chews and housing that wasn't being used and do area beautification. And they're intel soldiers. Meanwhile, like we said,
Yep.
we've got a contract for Floor and DynCorp to do that shit.
I just don't understand it. I mean, and that's the most army thing I've heard today is that you have a bunch of people you've paid thousands upon thousands upon thousands of dollars to train. I mean, I don't know if you guys did. I went to Defense Language Institute, and good God, the money it costs to train one linguist there, and then I get put into an aviation unit, and I'm flying around in spy planes, not speaking a word of Korean, and that cost how much money? And it's like, so you have intelligent soldiers there who are trained to collect and do the intel, you know, process and have intel capabilities, and they're used to freaking move beds out. Yeah, that's the most army thing I've heard today, dude. Actually, I didn't know they had done that. I feel bad for those guys. That sucks.
I feel bad for them too for a number of reasons. One, they're not getting any fucking job experience doing that. Like one day, those privates will have to become intel sergeants, and how the hell are they going to be intel sergeants? They never had to do their job in a high stress environment where we'd come into work. I remember very famously one day we came into work and there had been a suicide bombing, and people like an American had died. I'm pretty sure an American had died, and the boss was just like up in arms and he was freaking the fuck out. It's like, we got to do something. And I was like, you need to calm down, sir. And he's like, how can you be calm? I'm like, well, we can't go back and save his life. So let's as crude and as curt as that sounds, and that's an accurate way to look at it. Like, you take a step back, you know, take a deep breath, count to 10, and let's figure out a plan to go forward so we can find the people responsible for making the bomb and, you know, get rid of them so that it doesn't happen again. And those soldiers missed that opportunity to sit in that high stress, fast paced environment because they're doing bullshit.
Hey, so for this part of the podcast, we're going to give an Afghan update. So, being a podcast about Afghanistan, I feel like it's important to talk about current events happening there. One of the big sources for information and like rather up to date information is the Afghanistan subreddit. It's got a lot of local Afghans that post in that subreddit, so you kind of get a feel of what's happening in the country more than you would from, you know, whatever the New York Times decides to run that day. So we talked last week with the owners of Afghan Kebab in North Carolina, which is a great episode. And we talked a little bit about the Afghans eligible for refugee status. And this week, the U.S. Secretary of State basically made some remarks on expanding who and which Afghans are eligible for refugee status. So it goes, and there are some complications with this thing. So it's they've expanded to people that have worked at like U.S. news agencies, U.S.-based news organizations, U.S.-based aid and development agencies, and other relief groups. I guess those people that worked there were previously ineligible for this refugee status or for this more fast-tracked refugee status. But the issue is they can't begin the process in the process that Leo talked about, that, you know, We're going to look at all your contacts. We're going to look at your family. We're going to look and do a full background investigation. Apparently, they're not eligible for that process until they get out of Afghanistan. So these people that want to come here will have to go find a third country to live in, a third party country to live in, and the U.S. is not going to support them while they're in that third country and in the adjudication process. So it may have expanded it, but you're going to have to have the means to get out of Afghanistan, and it kind of defeats the purpose, I feel like. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Well, so my first thought is that means they're going to go to India, right? Like Leo did. Like there's a very good chance to go to India, maybe some parts of Pakistan. And we need to,
or someplace.
Yeah. Well, Tajikistan. So you mentioned that Tajikistan has also made some efforts to prepare themselves to receive those Afghan refugees, right? So maybe that will be a little easier, especially for those Afghans up in the northern part of the country. I'm not at all surprised that our government comes out and says, yeah, we're going to take on more refugees. Oh, by the way, it's still going to be damn near impossible for the average Afghan to meet the criteria because you've got to get through a war-torn country, probably with no money, get to a country that'll take you, that'll receive you. And like Leo said, like he doesn't have a birth certificate anymore. He's luckily he came when he did in '99, so it was a little different. But this is Afghanistan's a country that's not as documented as other countries are. This is going to be a difficult process. So if instead of becoming refugees and coming to America, they're refugees in Tajikistan or India or Pakistan, that will unfortunately possibly be what they have to settle for, which I guess is still better than the threat of the Taliban. But I'm not at all surprised by this. And I kind of mentioned that last week when this agreement was signed with the Taliban on February 29th, 2020. Why were we not doing this stuff then, knowing that a withdrawal was imminent? It doesn't make any sense to me. To compare it to another current event that I think people will be a little more understanding of. We knew about the first COVID cases at the end of December. How does our government go, we're the economic capital of the world. We know this is going to come to America eventually. Should we start being prepared or should we just sit on it until March? And we sat on it until March, right? Like you know that something needs to be done and we just didn't do anything until later on. And that's very much what it is with the refugee situation. We knew once we signed that peace agreement that we've got to get those interpreters and those aid workers and people that, volunteered at, State Department headquarters in the middle of Gore province, that they've got to get out of Afghanistan. And we pretty much dragged our feet until now. And look, not everybody's going to get out. It's just the simple truth is not everybody's going to get out and people are going to die because of it.
I mean, so do you think I think we should, go about setting up some sort of refugee camps in the bordering nations, working with those nations to kind of get something set up for these Afghan refugees, because if they helped us, I mean, that's about the least we can do, at least get them some sort of camp or something to stay in across the border so they can start this process if they want to.
I agree completely. When you look at it from this standpoint, like I think we're all relatively small government people, right? But when you look at it from the standpoint of, you helped us, we need to return the favor. This is well within reason of what would be returning a favor, right? And yeah, if it's increasing that coordination with Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, India, and Pakistan, we need to do that, right? We won't do it with Iran because petty reasons, right? That should be a separate issue for this matter, but that won't change. But we should absolutely find some way to provide assistance. Like we've still got State Department people in Afghanistan, right? Why are they, relocate them to Tajikistan or Uzbekistan, the other stands, India, and have them help. These contractors that are still out there, let's relocate them to these areas, like contractors that would be, valuable to what we're trying to do, but move them and let's try to streamline this process, which is almost impossible when you're dealing with the American federal government.
Yeah, I mean, I think we could definitely work with some of those border countries to just facilitate at least a place for refugees to stay, and then maybe even have State Department contractors there processing applications and stuff to try to speed it up. Because I mean, no one wants to live in refugee status like that because we decided to leave Afghanistan, which I still think is the correct move. I mean, we don't need to be there, but we need to do something to help those that helped us. I mean, that's the least we can do at this point.
We owe them, bottom line, we owe it to them and to their families to ensure that they're safe and taken care of, at least to a degree.
So here's an article from DW, which I believe is a German news website. I think it's like Deutsche Welle, which is like German for German world or something like that. I could be wrong. I'm wrong very often, but basically, uh, these changes to the refugee program can allow up to 50,000 more Afghans and their immediate families who don't qualify to be permanently resettled. That's a lot of people between now. It's August 3rd. It's my anniversary. Happy anniversary to my wife. And August 31st when we're leaving. Right. That's a lot of shit to do in 4 weeks. That's just not going to happen. Right? And then the cherry on the cake is Ashraf Ghani, president of Afghanistan. Once again, I think is not taking accountability and responsibility for his own military's failures. Here's a quote from him: "The current situation is due to a sudden decision on the withdrawal of the international troops. We've had an unexpected situation in the last 3 months." Well, what the fuck did he think was going to happen after we signed that agreement last year? This
Yeah,
this a lot of the blame falls solely on the shoulders of the Afghan government and the Afghan military. That's not to
right.
say that we are without blame, but like we've said before, they had 20 years to develop a military and they didn't.
Yeah, yeah, and they had 20 years to develop a government that worked. They didn't.
Mhm.
So, like, I mean, yeah. So, so we got that to deal with. We got Taliban kicking in the door at Lashkar Gah in Helmand,
Yeah,
and
speaking of not developing a military. Exactly.
yeah,
So,
and even Kandahar. I think Kandahar city is a very reasonable Taliban target before the end of the year.
oh, absolutely. And like, so what's going on in Lashkar Gah? So, I got this pulled up. Basically, the Taliban, I think, are at this point maybe a week or two away from taking it. Like, it's just one, it's in Helmand province, which, if you've listened to the podcast or if you've ever read or heard about Afghanistan and the war, you know that Helmand province is Taliban central, right? Like at the height of U.S. or NATO control throughout the country, nobody ever controlled Helmand like the Taliban did. It wasn't going to happen. That's why General McChrystal very famously wanted to take Helmand province because everybody told him it couldn't be done. He probably wouldn't have, right? But he would have tried. Uh, as we sit here right now, so this is the article. The residents of Lashkar Gah in southern Afghanistan have started to flee the city, moving out into the rural areas, going over into Kandahar or Nimruz to the west. If you've got some of these, probably the Baluch Afghans that are in the area, they might be jumping over the border to Iran. It looks like Lashkar Gah will probably be the first provincial capital to fall, and it'll probably happen before the U.S. withdrawal is officially completed. I mean, when you guys see that, I'm not surprised. But what are your thoughts?
I mean, yeah, I don't think there's any doubt that the Taliban are going to take Helmand soon. I mean, they control Helmand anyway. So with less international presence, I mean, we had to keep basically an entire a section of military there just to control Lashkar Gah anyway. And if they're all pulled out, they're not gonna. It doesn't stand a chance. But I think Kandahar is going to be the real target. I think you can easily take Helmand and Kandahar by the end of the year.
Yeah, and so. Did you see? There's that question in the Afghanistan subreddit said, if the Taliban, if they become the government again, similar to '96, do they relocate the capital to Kandahar? And my initial thought is no, because they didn't do it the first time. But then the person that wrote the question had some pretty good points, being that Kabul is still relatively anti-Taliban, and I don't think you're going to have that same anti-Taliban sentiment down in Kandahar. Now, it's still an urban area, so it's not as pro-Taliban as like the more rural parts of the province, but it is Kandahar. It is the conservative Afghan South, birthplace of the Taliban. I think it's very reasonable, maybe not by the end of this year, but eventually, if the Taliban does take over the government, that at some point they do relocate that capital to a place that is more favorable for them, be it Kandahar City or be it Lashkar Gah.
Yeah, someplace further south for sure. Yeah, I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see though what a Taliban controlled Afghanistan looks like in 2021. Probably not much different than it looked like in 1995, but I don't know.
Yeah, I think we
We'll
were
see.
wrong on that one. So we kind of talked about that, right? We're like, what's the Taliban government in 2021 going to look like? And I think we were all on the same page. Like, these are 20 somethings, early 30 somethings like us who grew up with TV and internet and the media and stuff like that. Thought, oh, surely they'll be, a little more relaxed on things like what sports people can and can't do. I don't think there was ever a question they would ban girls from going to school, right? And they'd probably do the beard thing again. But when you go onto that Afghanistan subreddit, people are posting like flyers and shit from the Taliban, and it's saying like, I don't read Pashto, but people on there do, and there's no music, there's no sports, there's no TV, there's no girls going to school, women can't leave the house without a male family member. Like, everything is going right back to the way it was in 1996. Hey.
Yeah, I don't think there's a
except for the
leniency at
poppy.
all. I think it's the same ideology, and I think that ideology, even in 2021, maybe even more in 2021, with like the I don't know, it just feels like at least in the West, it kind of feels like we live in a purely hedonistic society. Maybe they see that too. Maybe there is more of an appeal to that lifestyle. I don't know if I believed that way. Maybe there's more of an appeal to it in 2021 than there is now.
You got a point, Stu. I don't see the poppy cultivation going away. I think they got a taste of the money, and that's going to stick around. No, but I think you're right, Kyle, and I think part of it is when you think about it,
They've
Afghanistan.
essentially evolved into like a religious like drug cartel.
Yeah, it's the Sunni version of the Iranian government with drugs. That sounds about right. Um, well, I think you've got a point there, Kyle, about especially in a place that has different values than those out here in the West, where what we see as provocative, or maybe what they see as provocative, obviously is not provocative out here. Uh, but I think a big part of that is Afghanistan's really been in some state of warfare since like 1973. And I think you're going to get to a point where people are just tired of the fighting. And I think people are going to be willing to say, if it takes my wife having to be covered from head to toe every time she leaves to go to the market with us to be safe, I think people might be willing to make that trade off. I think we always talk about in the military. I think almost everybody in the military knows somebody that has died in war, right? But in Afghanistan, almost everybody, military or not, probably knows somebody that has died in the war, right? So I could see, I could see those people just being willing to accept a Taliban government if it means peace.
But that kind of brings us back to, you know, that kind of brings us back to 2001. Yeah, I think that's why the Taliban did so well in their conquest of southern Afghanistan. But I don't know. There's going to be some pushback. There's definitely going to be some pushback. I think there's always going to be fighting. There's always going to be a civil war going on. I don't think the Taliban's going to subdue the whole country, but they can subdue a good chunk of it, and at least declare themselves the government.
Yeah,
and what's going to be the new Badakhshan, because they've taken Badakhshan preemptively this time. Where's the last holdout for the Northern Alliance now?
Panjir. It's still Panjir, right? Like that's where they'll be held out at. That's where they'll like reconstitute basically. But Panjir's not very big. And I know we've mentioned Panjir and we've mentioned Ahmad Shah Massoud. For the listeners, Panjir, I believe, is like two provinces north of Kabul. right? Like that sounds right in that area.
Yeah.
And it is, it's, it, I don't know if it's relatively Western. I think Herat pre-Soviet occupation was probably the most Western, uh, like cultural, most culturally Western part of Afghanistan. But Panjwai is where you've had that traditional that Tajik population that doesn't want to, you know, kowtow or bow down to the Taliban. These Pashtun insurgents that they see coming from the south, and I think you will see, since Badakhshan's gone, I mean, effectively gone, that um, it'll be Panjwai where they hold out at, unless China comes in and does something, which we'll probably have to get into that here in a couple weeks.
Anything else going on in the Afghan news cycle this week? I was
Najrab district was retaken from the Taliban.
Which districts do?
Najrab over in Kapisa, which is east of Kabul.
I think they'll be swapping stuff in and out for a while, but I do think it's going to be Taliban control at the end of the day.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, I think a large part of that, and is, I think we need to talk about this guy eventually, is I think Mullah Mansour gets some credit for some of this shit. And I'll explain later on, but I think we should probably eventually do an episode talking about him and Habatullah as the emirs that succeeded Omar. But, you know, I think Mullah Mansour, who was probably not the best Taliban emir, it's probably why Pakistan told us where he was, at least my opinion, so that we could kill him. But he put some stuff in the right places, and between him and Habatullah's insistence on judicial jurisprudence, that the Taliban is stronger than they've been in a long time. You know, so I think it's inevitable. I don't know if it's necessarily by the end of the year the Taliban run everything. Like you guys said, I think we're going to see a lot more back and forth. You'll see a lot more taking and retaking of district centers and districts. I think really the biggest changes will be like if Ismail Khan dies, because he's like 75 years old, who replaces him? You got a power vacuum in Herat. Like, who the hell does he have that's anything like him? Because when Razik died, like Gorzang, his number two, Gorzang was a pretty good dude, but he's not Razik, right? Like,
yeah. I mean, you know, the IRGC is setting something up though.
They are. So I'm happy you bring that up. So here's something. I posted this on the Facebook page, I think a week or so ago now, maybe 2 weeks. There is the insurgent group, the Fedayeen, which is made up of Hazara Shia Afghans. And I remember when we were in Afghanistan, like Iran was recruiting these dudes to go to Syria to fight against ISIS. Well, that fight was won. And so there was a great article about there's upwards of like 50,000 Shia Hazara Afghans who are trained by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, which is Iran's special forces, who are coming back into Afghanistan. So that's a new player in the game, right? So that'll be very interesting to see.
I wonder how many they had, you know.
Yeah, the article I saw said 50,000, which who knows?
No. Yeah, that's a lot of people. That would be your own well-trained Iranian-trained army. That'd be pretty crazy.
It's probably closer to 20,000, 25 maybe at the most.
I mean, that makes Ismail Khan's successor, if he can like hold on to it, like probably the most powerful warlord in Afghanistan.
Yeah. So here I got it. I'm gonna pull it up. Okay, so yeah, it's not 50,000. I think they said the high estimates now is around. Well, it says 1,500, but I don't know if that's like 1,500 in Syria or 1,500 total or in Iran. At the height, it was 20,000. I wouldn't be surprised if it was around 5,000. But if they're saying 1,500, sure, why not? That'd be plenty enough to secure Daykundi until 20,000 Talibs roll up.
Yeah, then you're defending. Who knows?
Yeah.
Those Hazaras got some fight in them.
Well, I mean, it's kind of similar to the Israel situation, right? Everybody around you wants to kill you, so you really have no choice but to fight.
Yeah,
I think if outside of Panjwai, I wouldn't be surprised if the Hazara provinces are the last ones to fall.
yeah.
Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another week of the Boardwalk Podcast. Had a good time talking to you guys about the wonderful world of contracting in Afghanistan. This is just a reminder that if you do listen to our podcast, if you like our podcast, we really encourage you to share it with other people. We don't make any money doing this. It costs us time and costs us money, so we're not even asking for donations. So we just do it as a form of catharsis, I think, and to educate people. So be sure to check us out on Instagram at the Boardwalk Podcast. We have a Facebook page. And you can of course find all of our episodes on pretty much any podcast app you choose. So thanks again for tuning in this week, and we'll see you next time.